Good morning, friends. Thanks for joining me. If you're new here, I'm Stephanie, and this is Simply from Scratch. It is early in the morning, and I need to get going on making some apple butter because it takes about 10 to 12 hours to make in the crock pot. So I just wanted to share with you guys real quick how I do that. It is super simple, very few ingredients. It is just golden delicious apples, a cup of brown sugar, a cup of regular sugar, and then I like to use apple pie spice instead of doing separate cinnamon and cloves and other things that people like to use. I find that it gives it a really great flavor. So I'm going to show you real quick how I put this together and how easy it is, and it's so good on biscuits or toast. Definitely a keeper. You can store this in the refrigerator, you can freeze it, or you can it so then it becomes shelf stable and you can use it for up to a year after canning. So thanks for being here, and if you like this video and you like the content, please like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much. Okay, so I have all my apples rinsed. My crock pot is on and it's warming up. So I'm going to go ahead and start getting all the apples ready for the apple butter. I just like to cut around the core of the apple. I do not peel my apples. I find that it's an unnecessary step. So I just do a medium chop and I begin to fill my crock pot. And so the reason I have chosen Golden Delicious is I did an apple comparison several years ago when we lived not far from an apple farm on what they recommended for things like applesauce, apple pie, things like that. And I just found that the best balance, in my opinion, came from a Golden Delicious. It's got some sweetness, it's got just a touch of tart, but it seems to hold the sugar really well without being super sweet, and so, or even super tart, depending on what you're making. And they just seem, in my opinion, again, to hold up really well. So that's why I choose Golden Delicious for all of my apple projects. So anyways, we're going to get this into a medium chop and fill the crock pot, and then we will move on to the next step. Now from here, I'm just going to add in 1 cup of sugar, 1 cup of brown sugar, crumble it up a little bit over there. And then I like to do 1 to 2 tablespoons of apple pie spice filling. I feel like I like that the best. But you can start with 1 and then taste it and see what you think. And if you want more, it's really up to you. Or you can just use cinnamon in it as well. And so I'm just going to sprinkle all this on and get a spoon to stir it up. And I want to say I put, most recipes call for anywhere from 5.5 to 6 cups of apples into a crock pot. I do more than that. I don't even measure, honestly. I just cut apples and I fill my crock pot. And as soon as I get close to the top, I will stop, add in the sugar. All of the sugar with the heat and the juice of the apple will dissolve. So this doesn't have to be perfectly stirred up and coated all the apples, because it will all come together. And after 10 hours, you're going to take an immersion blender to it and blend it all up so it'll get in there. So you just want to kind of coat the apples like that. And then if I have room, which I do have a little bit more room, and I've got 2, 3, 4, 5 more apples left. I won't put 5 in here, they won't fit, but I will cut up at least 1 or maybe 2 more apples in to see. Now every recipe is a little different. I'm not following any one in particular. I just like to look at different recipes and see what I like from that recipe. But some say peel your apple, some say don't. I don't peel them because you're going to blend everything up anyways, and so it won't matter. And if you don't have an immersion blender, you can put it through a regular blender. Just be careful, because by the time you get to that point, it is going to be very hot. And so obviously you don't want to burn yourself. With adding some additional apples, I don't believe I've made this for several years, but it's been a couple years since I have. I want to say just doing the 1 cup of sugar and brown sugar is sufficient, even though it's more than 6 cups of apples. You just don't, I don't personally want it too sweet, but I do want that really good apple flavor, and apples are still in season. They come in season in the fall. And so while we're heading into winter, sort of. We live in Florida, so it doesn't really ever feel like winter here, but I do miss the cooler temperatures, and this just will make the house smell so amazing. Now, typically I will can this so it's shelf stable, so I can put it in our pantry and keep it for another time. And this is out. Actually, one more thing. I actually also add a little salt to mine as well. It just kind of enhances the flavor. I'm just going to sprinkle probably about maybe a half a teaspoon or so of salt on there just to start. And then I'm just going to cover this up, and we're going to let this cook for 10 hours on low in the crock pot. And this is a 7-quart crock pot, so again, this is likely about 8 to 10 cups worth of apples, which took about 10 apples to put in here. So anyways, we will check back in about 10 hours and I will show you guys the rest. Okay, so this is what the apples look like after 8 hours of cooking. So I'm going to give it another 2 hours and then we will blend it up. Okay, so now it's actually been 10 hours since I started the apple butter, and as you can see, the apples have cooked down even more. There's a ton of liquid in there. The apples are super soft. Now I'm going to start with the immersion blender, and I will tell you, if you've never used one, please be super careful. This mixture is really hot. Even though it's been cooking on low, it still gets very, very hot, and the way an immersion blender works is it sucks everything in from underneath where the blades are, so it creates this massive suction. And if you lift up too fast or turn it just the wrong way, it can splatter. So you don't want to burn yourself, so just be careful. I mean, I have gotten splattered plenty of times. I say this to warn you guys, and it's so easy to just accidentally move it a little bit and it causes it to shoot out. So just a warning. So anyways, I am blending up all the apple butter, and I'll do this for a good minute or two. And the reason is you want to make sure that you have blended the peels, the apples, all the seasoning, and the goal is to not have this chunky. This is not something you want chunky. I mean, you could, but a true apple butter is designed to be smooth yet thick, and that thickness will come just a little bit later in the process of making the apple butter. But you want to give this a really good blend and make sure it's all to the consistency that you want. And typically I will just use the immersion blender to stir and lift, as you can see, and I'll be able to tell by feeling it if there's any chunks left or if it's the consistency that I'm looking for. And some of it just is, it really will be a personal preference, but again, a true apple butter should be smooth and thick. Now, if for any reason you do not have an immersion blender, you can use a regular blender to get the consistency that you need to make the apple butter. You may have to do it in batches depending on the size of your blender. Just make sure you put your lid on nice and tight and be careful. This is super hot and you surely don't want it to come splattering up everywhere. If you do that, just put it in another container until it's all processed and smooth, and then you can pour it back into your crock pot. So I'm now getting a spoon because I want to show you guys the consistency. Now this apple butter has been cooking for 10 hours, and so this is what it's going to look like. It's smooth, but you can see how thin it is. See how quickly it just kind of runs off the spoon. It's not done yet. So what you're going to do is you are actually going to leave your crock pot uncovered for another 2 hours, and I actually wound up going 2.5 hours. And the reason you do this is because you're not trapping the moisture in there any longer, and it's allowing the apple butter to thicken. Just come stir it about every 30 minutes and then you'll be good. And from here, once I've reached the consistency I want, I add in about a tablespoon of vanilla extract to it. You just add that in at the end, and that just enhances that apple spice flavoring even more. And again, if you just do cinnamon, it'll enhance the cinnamon flavor. I just personally like the apple pie spice blend the best. So now you can see it's been 12 and a half hours of making the apple butter. It is late at night by the time I got this done, because I did decide to go ahead and can this and process it so it can be shelf stable, because my freezer is already full of jams and jellies that are freezer jellies, and so I prefer a freezer jam over a cooked jam just because it's got more of a fresh fruit flavor. So I didn't want to take up any more space with apple butter. Now you can see that is much thicker. It doesn't fall off the spoon as easily, and that is what you're looking for. So again, you need to cook it uncovered for another 2 to 2.5 hours. I have done it where I didn't cook it uncovered one year, and it was super runny. It wasn't, I mean, it tasted wonderful. It just wasn't the correct consistency that's needed for it to be a thick apple butter, because once it's done processing and cools, it will thicken even more. So I'm going to go ahead and get all my jars filled and then get them into the water bath canner. And for half pint jars, you are going to want to process these for 15 to 20 minutes. I will have to go back and look at my recipe, but I will put the time up on the screen. I want to say it's 15 minutes once it's boiling, and then 5 minutes resting with the temperature, with the heat off. And so I will double check that and put that up on the screen. Now, do not forget that when you are actually processing apple butter, because you are going to water bath it, you want to make sure that obviously not only are your jars clean, that you have clean lids and clean rims, but you also want to make sure your jars are warm. You want to make sure that the temperature of the jar is very close to the temperature of the apple butter going in, because you don't want to shock the glass, because that can cause it to either shatter while filling or even shatter in your water bath canner. I've had that happen before. It's only happened one time, and it only happened with one jar. So I don't know if I shocked the jar or if there was just a weak point in the canning jar. I'm not 100% sure, because again, it's only happened one time, so I don't really know, but just want to make sure that they're warm. So what I did is I warmed them up, and then I kept them on the stove next to the water bath, which is on the highest heat, and a very large burner on our stove. So it kept everything nice and warm, so I didn't have to worry about shocking the jar. Okay, so I do have a little bit of apple butter left in the bottom of the crock pot. It was not enough to fill the half pint jar, and I could have gotten a smaller one, but I didn't want to have to worry about washing it and then drying it and getting it ready. And so I decided to just put that extra apple butter into another glass container that I can just allow it to cool on the countertop, and we can enjoy it right away because it'll go into the refrigerator. So, and again, keep in mind you can water bath this, refrigerate it, or freeze it. Water bathing the apple butter will allow it to be shelf stable until you open it, and that means you can keep it a lot longer. So anyways, you also want to make sure that when you fill your jars that they are only a half an inch from the top, and then you want to give it a good wipe down and make sure that there's no apple butter on the rim, because you want to be able to make sure that your butter has a good seal on it so nothing spoils, because again, remember, this is going to be shelf stable till you open it. So if there's anything that prevents that seal, then that's when bacteria can get in and can grow, and then obviously you definitely don't want that. So you can see the apple butter has a nice jiggle to it, so it is starting to thicken even a little bit more once it's in the jar. And that will continue to happen after it cools once it's processed. Okay, so now all of my jars have their lids on them, and I always just make sure that they've are tight before I put them in. You don't want them super tight, but you do want a tight seal on them. And so I'm getting everything into the water. You want to be careful. Obviously, everything is hot. Place them in there. I usually like to start as I form a circle around the edge so it stays balanced, because it's really easy for that to get off balance and for the jars to fall into the water. So then you have to obviously sit them right upright again, because you don't want them on their side when they're processing. So you will just lower your canning jars into the water and go ahead and cover the lid. And once it comes to a boil, which doesn't take very long with the lids on, you can see the steam coming out. It is ready. So you just process for 15 minutes, just set a timer. And then once that's done, you will turn off the heat and take the lid off, and then leave it in the water for 5 minutes. And then once that's done, you will then remove the jars from the water and then set them aside to cool. Now be careful, because as you can tell, it is hot. So I usually wind up, I'm not sure why I thought I could do it without the towel, but I just use a towel and try to lift up as evenly as I can so nothing tumbles over. And then hits the water. It just makes it more challenging to get it out. But I have the tools that I bought to remove the jars from the water. And so you want to use those to pull out. If you don't have any, you can try tongs, but you do want to be careful. If you can get the canning tools, that is definitely the best option. Now, I opted this time to put these on a cooling rack with a cookie sheet underneath, just because you want to be careful. These jars are really hot, and I made the mistake one time of putting them on a towel on my table thinking it would be fine, and it damaged my table. The heat, I still have rings on my table from the applesauce that I made. So thankfully it's a farmhouse style, and so it kind of just works with it, but at the same time I damage my table by not doing this. So you can put them on a countertop and they'll be fine, but just be careful about putting them on a table thinking that they would be okay, or at least make sure that they're on a cooling rack so there is some heat or not heat, I apologize, some air that can circulate around it so it will cool without damaging anything. Okay, my jars are now done and they will cool overnight. You want to listen for popping of the lids. You'll want to check the lids in the morning to make sure that they are sealed. You will know by pushing down. If nothing bounces, then the jar is sealed and they are ready for the shelf. If for any reason that lid still bounces up and down, you'll want to stick those jars into your refrigerator or freezer to use right away. So this is the final product. As you can see, it's nice and thick. It's got a deep, rich color. It has a wonderful flavor, and it goes so well on whether it's an English muffin, a biscuit, pancakes. You can put it on toast, either way. So I just want to thank you guys for joining me today as I showed you how I make my apple butter. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. And I just want to say I appreciate each and every one of you for being here with me as I do this journey.